So, John C. Arnold, candidate for Essex County Sheriff, joins us today at Insider NJ. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Sir, I just want to talk a little bit about your candidacy, and if we could start with why you want to be sheriff of Essex County.
Okay, great. That's a great question. Well, I worked in law enforcement in Essex County for over 20 plus years and cumulative of over close to 30 years now. I started as a beat cop in the University of Medicine and Dentistry, went to the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, as you know, is the chief law enforcement agency in the county, and then retired, came out of retirement, worked with the Newark Police Department as the number 2 in charge, the Deputy Director of Police. And, you know, a lot of our former officers, my generation of officers, when we look at what's going on now across the nation, we're perplexed as to why policing has gotten to this state where it's such a great divide between community and policing. When we came up, I had a gentleman on one of my podcasts the other day, and we were saying that, you know, when we were out on the streets, we dealt with much more dangerous criminals. We dealt with criminals who, when we chased them, they pulled out guns, long guns, submachine guns, would fire upon us, and, you know, we returned fire, and, you know, we were able to subdue them. And then we have now the officers are killing across the nation unarmed Black men in communities, and it's a disconnect. And I think that the disconnect is because of lack of training, as we saw this week with the shooting of Mr. Wright. A lot of procedures were broken there. Basic things that we learned in the academy is not being done, and leadership across the nation. A lot of law enforcement executives are not properly leading the departments. And in Essex County, when I heard the sheriff, a group approached me, and when I heard what the sheriff was planning on doing, which was basically the same, I said he can't do the same in a environment that is changing, where now there are different groups that are coming together and saying, listen, they want police reform, and he has no plan to address that. And I have been working as a civilian, still attached to police departments, and know that we in Essex County have to have true police reform in order to move forward and to continue to keep our communities safe. And that is the basis, that's the crux of why I'm running, because I believe that my qualifications, my experience, and my vision for law enforcement in Essex County would be served best as Sheriff of Essex County.
Mr. Arnold, there's a lot there, and certainly your experience in law enforcement creates an opportunity for me to ask you a lot of questions. But when you talk about coming up in law enforcement and subduing a suspect in a certain way, and then comparing it to what you're seeing now, a lot of laymen like myself, a lot of civilians are told that, well, now we have cameras, and so we're seeing the way things have always been. And can you maybe educate me and educate our viewers a little bit? Is that not the case? Are we getting a glimpse now with this new social media age of practices that have always been there, but we never were quite exposed to them in this way? Or indeed, as you suggested earlier, have there been different practices? Could you untangle that a little bit?
Yeah, I disagree with that statement that we're seeing what has always been, because I never conducted myself as a police officer the way that these officers are conducting themselves now. And that's just a fact. When I talk to the officers who are in my generation, one, you know, we had some of the best leaders in law enforcement. I stand on their shoulders. And one of the things that they reiterated to us is do not do what you're seeing done today by law enforcement that's being captured on social media. I believe in body cameras. I believe in body cameras, one, for the protection of our citizens, to make sure our officers are doing their job the correct way. And I also believe that it protects the officers from false allegations. You know, we have good officers and we do have some bad officers. And I believe that the cameras, it works both ways. So they have to be an essential part of every police department in the nation moving forward, because we are guardians of the community. We are hired to protect and serve, and we're doing less of both. We're not really protecting if we're killing folks on basic cause, unarmed men and women, those in mental health crisis. If we're responding and we're killing them, we're not protecting them, and we definitely aren't servicing them. So as the law enforcement executive, I need to sit back and look at and review the camera, the tape, and see what my officers are doing and where can we make changes at. So, I don't agree that it's something that was always going on. Yes, certain elements of it were, yeah, police being abusive to the community. Yes, that part. But the way they're policing now, I do not agree with. Members of my team that I'm associated with, we definitely don't agree. And we know that we can do better policing in our communities.
So I'd like to ask you about your reaction, your professional reaction to the two big cases in the news right now. First of all, the George Floyd killing in Minnesota, and also the Dante White killing in Minnesota. And your reaction, what did the police officers do wrong in those cases? And then the second part of the question is, do you see, you mentioned that the sitting sheriff is not apparently interested in reforms, but are we really at a place where what we see in Minnesota could also happen here because of lack of training or lack of receptivity to reform?
Oh, okay, great. So first of all, talking about George Floyd, many officers condemn the actions of Derek Chauvin. We don't even consider him to be an officer because what he did was basically just kill George Floyd in front of the entire world. He tarnished the badge. They can make up any excuse they want. They can say that George Floyd died by drugs in his system. But, the basic, the bottom line is that he was killed by Derek Chauvin by going beyond what was necessary. Once the cuff, listen, I've been in some scuffles with bad guys, and we fought. But once the cuffs got on, it was no need to further do anything to that individual. Because if you're really concerned about the integrity of your cases, you don't want to taint it with something that happened like it did in Minnesota. And then you find out that George Floyd, a lot of the allegations against him were not true. So as far as Derek Chauvin goes, listen, I disagree with some of my constituents on policing matters in the United States, but we all come together and say that what we saw on television with George Floyd was wrong. Mr. Wright's case, all right, she's saying that, she got her taser confused with her gun. Through proper training, police officers go through range training in New Jersey twice a year. And I have not been on the range using a taser. I do go to the range, to make my qualifications as a retired officer. But there's a difference between holding a taser and holding a gun. And when I looked at that tape procedurally, I saw a lot of infractions, a lot of bad training, which means it's not the officer's fault, but it's leadership's fault. Because when you have body cameras and you're supposed to randomly check what your officers are doing, she just didn't make that mistake just then and there, to say taser, and you don't know that you have your service weapon. That's a bit questionable to me. And, she almost shot her partner. Whenever you bring a gun into a situation, there was no need to bring a gun into the situation. There's really no need to bring a taser into that situation. And experienced officers would have said, listen, all right, he got away. Okay, we know who he is. We'll get him. We'll we'll write a summons to him, or we'll go pick him up at a later date. But there's no need to get into a conflict such as that. And for those reasons right there, Mr. Wright is dead. His family is dealing with the death of their son. And of course, George Floyd, there's nothing to say. I mean, it was a murder. And I'm quite sure that the jury is going to come back and find Derek Chauvin guilty of killing George Floyd. And the third part of your question, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Well, that's quite all right. But first of all, thank you for correcting the record. It's Dante Wright, and I apologize. I think I called him White, but thank you.
Right.
And
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you see some sort of outdated procedures in the sheriff's office now. When you talk about reforms and talking about procedures that can bring officers up to date, what would that look like?
So yes, we study what's going on in the sheriff's department, and there's reports out, there are depositions out about the lack of training of sheriff's officers in Essex County, and we have to understand, as Essex County as a whole, the thing that I value working in the civilian component right now is that I see a different need different needs that police officers should embrace, the police departments should embrace. First of all, let's talk about the physical training and encountering physical training of weaponry and driving vehicles, and that needs to be updated. It needs to be updated training. Latest best practices need to be implemented in the department. And when I look around and see the departments, because I'm in the community, I don't see the officers adhering to any new policies, the same old things that we used to do when I first came on the job. Secondly, now we have to deal with a very serious issue that law enforcement hides very well, and that's the mental health of our officers. We have to start addressing the mental health, the state of our officers, because law enforcement is the only career where we send men and women out in the community with the authority to take another human life. And we have to understand that sometimes these encounters with the community, especially going to scene after scene after scene and seeing blood and carnage and being provoked in the situation, it builds up. And officers are the masters at holding stuff inside. And when you hold stuff inside, there has to be a release. And unfortunately, people in our community are the release. Whether an officer is pulling over someone and being very abusive verbally to that citizen on a car stop, whether they're being physically aggressive to someone during arrest, which there's no need for. And yes, is it a need for us to address that and move? Can that possibility happen here? Can a George Floyd happen? Absolutely. As long as we're sending officers out ill-equipped and not whole, yes, George Floyd can happen here. There have been instances of George Floyd's and Derek Dante Wright's happening here in Essex County, and those officers were brought to justice. So yes, I honestly think that we don't have to, at this point in time, since we know these things are going across the nation, why are we responding or being reactive to it? Let's be proactive and start preparing our officers to be better officers, better, higher caliber officers to bring the best service to our community and the best means of protection to our citizens. So yes, to answer your question, it can definitely happen if there's not training and good leadership in the Essex County Sheriff's Office.
Is our political apparatus failing the officers at this point in time and not giving you all the resources that you need?
I think that, again, I look at leadership. One of the things that we do in police work is, a lot of the police work is male dominated. And as men, we tend to want to buy toys. So when we get the finances from the politicians who appropriate the different monies to the cities, the grants, we tend to buy weaponry, and we tend to buy a lot of things that sit in storage. What I am for, and what my administration would do, is that we would invest more in the community, more into the public. We want to put the public back into public safety. A lot of these offices, a lot of the official decisions by politicians are being made without real input from the community. And you can't, it's like having a one-way relationship that everything goes one way. It can't. My pride of being a police officer was serving my community, seeing that homeowner, that citizen, having justice in their life, and getting out of the car and talking with them, and not only just police work, but if there were a situation where, like we had in Newark, we had a captain in Newark Police who was the community loves him. I love him. He's now the chief of police. But one of the young men from the community had a car. It got towed. Car wasn't registered. He didn't have insurance. He didn't know. The young man didn't know that that's what you need to drive a car. You just think, I bought a car for $500, great deal, I'm driving. So what they did was they took the young man down there, got the car out of the impound, put insurance on it, got it registered, and the young man learned something. And it was a relationship that was fostered between police and community. And I think that that's the essence. That's what we used to come on the job and want to do, make a difference in our community. And I think that we need to get back to that. I really do.
You think the sheriff's office now is too far removed from the community?
I know it is, because, well, especially the Black community. The Black voters in Essex County basically help Armando Fontoura get in office every time he runs. And when we look around, we don't see sheriff's patrols in our community. The only time we'll see sheriff patrols in our community is when there is an election. And the only time we'll see a real increase is when there's a qualified candidate running against Armando Fontoura. And when he comes into our community, to show his presence is to criminalize us. He's pulling us over. He's giving us tickets. He's doing speed traps. Where are you 364 days of the year when we need this? When we have folks riding up and down our main boulevards, county roads that you're supposed to patrol, doing 100 miles an hour, acting foolish. Where are your speed traps then? Don't criminalize us and come because you want us to know that you are the sheriffs and an election is coming up and, oh yeah, I see the sheriff's department. I'll say this, and I said it to the some members and friends of the county sheriff's office back in 2012. I said, you ought to thank me. And they said, why? I said, because when I ran, you guys racked up so much overtime. That's the only time we saw it. And we saw it from the time I announced until the primary, when he won the primary. And then it was gone from our community. I applauded what they were doing. I love seeing officers in the community, but we don't get a fair share. We don't get a return on our investment from the Essex County Sheriff right now in our community. And that's another reason why I'm running, because I intend to have more of a presence in our community, in the African-American, Latino community, as well as all the other communities, to make sure that the Sheriff's Department, his presence is in our community and working in our community.
What's the relationship between the Sheriff's Office and the Newark Police Department, and how has that relationship changed under the current mayor in the last few years? You were second in command. I listened to the dates, and I think it was probably before Mayor Baraka took over. But how is that relationship now? How might it improve? Have you seen an improvement, or is the sheriff's office not working sufficiently in conjunction with the Newark Police Department?
Yes. So before Mayor Baraka became the mayor of the city of Newark, when he was Councilman Baraka, I was one of the people who accompanied him down to the county freeholders meeting, which is now the county commissioners meeting, where he was pleading for them to bring the sheriff's office resources into the city of Newark as a councilman. They did nothing for him. Crime, the South Ward of Newark was one of the highest crime wards, and that was his ward. And this man was passionate about getting police resources into the South Ward to cut down on crime. When Mayor Baraka became when he became mayor, I was then deputy police director from day one of him becoming mayor. And we've always had a good relationship with law enforcement individually. But to get things in Newark done, we could have used more resources from the sheriff's department. But again, politics was playing a role in this, and we didn't get those resources. And we took over a department, Director Venable and Mayor Baraka, we took over a department that was depleted. We were down to like 800 officers from 1,300. We didn't have enough resources, and we made requests, but the sheriff could have done more. We were out in the streets, we would walk the community, and I would see the sheriffs when I went to the North Ward, but I would not see the sheriff's department in the Central and in the West and in the South Ward. Mm-hmm. And that bothered me as deputy director, because you have a lot of county roads running through the biggest city of New Jersey. And listen, send a unit up here, man. I mean, listen, you got people out here. We can't do everything. We're responding to calls. We're 800 men, down from 1,300. So, I mean, he could have sent more people to the community, and he didn't do it. And we struggled. We struggled until after I left and Mayor Baraka transitioned to a public safety director, they got more officers on the street, and then you were able to address the issues and the crimes in Newark adequately. But listen, to send a 20-man unit to Newark every once in a while would have been great, and especially since you have the Bureau of Narcotics, you have more finances, you have the burn grant, you have more resources to do narcotics investigations in Newark, and it wasn't done. It wasn't done.
In the history of the Essex County Sheriff's Office, there has never been an African-American sheriff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you contextualize the significance of your candidacy and what it would mean to the office and to the county and to Newark?
Well, several things. One, you always take care of home. When I say that, I don't mean that you disregard the other areas or neglect other areas, because the whole of Essex County is my home. So in order to take care of my home, it includes the communities that the sheriff's office is not visible in. Being an African American sheriff is an inspiration to the African American community, especially the young people who are looking to law enforcement. But the problem is that a lot of times they look at law enforcement officials and they don't see any representation of themselves. But if they saw John Arnold, a man who grew up in the city of Newark, went to the Newark school system, graduated from Newark public schools, went to the Marine Corps, served in the Marines, came back, became a police officer, and rose up through the ranks, became the deputy director, and now the sheriff. That's an inspiration for a lot of young men and women who desire to be police officers who look like me. And for a long time, I think that they would look to me to bring some type of relief to the fear and anxiety that they have, knowing that an African-American sheriff understands their situation, understands their plight. He can relate to it. I have a black son. I have black daughters. And I know the issues. I hear the conversations that are going on amongst them when it comes to law enforcement. And I think that it's overdue. When I ride through the suburbs right now, I see Black Lives Matter signs on black homeowners' lawns, on white homeowners' lawns, and I love it because everybody is seeing that we're moving in a new direction and there needs to be change. And they're saying, yes, Black lives do matter. Yes, we know all lives matter, but there's something missing, and they are acknowledging it. And we're standing hand in hand. Our kids, my kids grew up in West Orange. Listen, I learned about the Jewish faith through my kids' friends. I learned about the Italian. I've had more Italian food than my own relatives who are Italian by having meals and barbecues over their friends' houses. So, I mean, Essex County is a great opportunity to have an African-American sheriff for the first time. It's time. Because, you know, the current sheriff has been there for 30 years and we can't relate to him. He can't relate to us. And he said that from day one when he announced his candidacy for re-election. If you look at what he said and what I said, it's not inclusive of LGBTQ, of the Haitian community, the Jamaican community, the African community, the African-American community. It's not. And that's a problem. So I think for 339 years, it's time for someone who looks like me of African-American descent to ascend to that title. I'm qualified. I paid my dues. I worked with a number of agencies. I know what the flavor of the community is. And I think it's time. I think that I'll do a much better job than what we're getting now throughout the entire county as far as service and response from the sheriff's department.
What sparked you to choose law enforcement as a career?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. I'm a second generation law enforcement. I didn't want to be a police officer, but unfortunately, it's in my blood. My entire family, from back to the slave time, were police officers. A lot of them, were when slavery opened up, they became police officers down in Georgia. And my dad was one of the most highly decorated police officers in the city of Newark. He was well known. He was rated as a national cop. He came second in the nation back in the 60s and early 70s because he was committed to community. And when you look at his jobs, the jobs that he did that got him recognition, they were all against hardened criminals. And I used to sit there and watch my dad. And I, as a kid growing up in Newark, I used to run into some of the people that he locked up. And I used to be afraid. I said, man, my dad locked him up, and they're going to retaliate. But they said, listen, man, your dad, he was a fair cop. He did some great things. It was because of him that I'm still alive today. And that, as a young 14-year-old kid sitting in the barbershop listening to these men talk about how my dad changed their life, when I did have the opportunity to become a police officer, I did it. Coming out of the military, I knew that I wanted to serve my community as I served my country. And that's what motivated me to become a police officer. And even though I'm retired from active law enforcement, I've still been active with law enforcement, and I still love it. I am a blue blood son.
What did you do in the Marine Corps?
Oh, now, I did a lot of stuff. Some of that I shouldn't have, getting in trouble as a young Marine, but my primary job was supply and infantry in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you go?
I was down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and then I was detailed to a recruiting attachment up here in New Jersey. And then I spent time in the 6th Motor Transport Marine Reserve.
I'd like to ask you, Mr. Arnold, a little bit about legislation, both passed and that may be passed, starting with marijuana legalization. It's now law in New Jersey. How has that impacted law enforcement's responsibility? Also, I'd like to ask you about gun violence prevention, a gun violence prevention proposal that Governor Murphy put on the table yesterday, and also a proposal to require law enforcement officers to live in the communities they serve. Should it be a requirement? So if we could start with just marijuana legalization and how it's impacted the job that you do and your colleagues do.
Yes, well, the legalization of marijuana is, I don't personally have a problem with it because I think that the way that the laws have been enforced definitely violated many human rights. It was a gateway drug. And when I say gateway drug, I'm not necessarily talking about gateway to harder drugs. I'm talking about as a gateway to prison, because we use, meaning police officers, the law enforcement community, use those type of arrests to harass, and we found even murder young men in the community from marijuana. You know, when you talk about drugs, I worked narcotics I was hired to work narcotics for several years, and I ran the narcotics unit. Marijuana in America it was illegal for a time, but we found that marijuana is being used. We found it before it became this past year legal. We found that it had many other uses, and it benefited, folks who had cancer, as far as their pain in their body, their appetite. It was so many different uses that it could have been used for. And I feel that what we did in law enforcement was we messed up, and we should not be locking folks up for something that is medicinal. There is now Denver, other states who have adopted, got rid of marijuana. They decriminalized it. And guess what? It doesn't really contribute to crime. So, we need to come out of that, transition out of that part of law enforcement. They're going to smoke marijuana anyway. So, that it's not, and most of the people who smoke marijuana, they're like everyday normal citizens. So to criminalize them for that type of drug, I think that we moved in the right direction. And law enforcement, we could adapt. It was used as a tool to lock folks up. But listen, if a person is bad, you're going to find, some violation of the law to effect an arrest and protect the community. And folks smoking marijuana, they're smoking a joint. We were locking up people for smoking a joint and ruin their career. And what I found with narcotics arrests is that a person can get arrested for narcotics and be disqualified from things that I committed a murder are not disqualified from. So I just think that, the law had to be rewritten. We had to look at it again. And, I'm glad that we moved on. It's decriminalized. And now we can move on and get back to the business of law enforcement, really going after criminals in our community.
How do you think that the package of gun violence prevention reforms presented by the governor yesterday may have missed the mark? Maybe some of them are good, but do you think that there's sufficient emphasis on mental health in the communities, or on specifically on gang violence and the guns that gangs are using to kill one another?
Okay, so there's two different things. Well, actually, three different things. One, with mental health, I applaud New Jersey. I stand by the governor in requiring checks of mental health because a lot of times when a person is mental health crisis, they use a gun to hurt themselves or to hurt others. Right now, we're dealing with a society that has more mental health issues than ever before. And studies are being conducted to find out why. But a person must be, including police officers, must be in their right mind when they have a gun, to handle a gun, and when they possess a gun. So as far as him removing anything, as far as mental health issues, we already see throughout the nation this year alone over 40 mass shootings. I mean, that's a lot. And a lot of these folks are depressed. They're having mental health crisis. So yes, we need to make sure that if a person is not mentally stable, they should not possess a gun. I don't believe that we should infringe in our efforts to get gun control. We should infringe upon the rights of American citizens to own weapons, because weapons, you have a right to protect yourself. I believe that. I, for a long time, didn't purchase a weapon or didn't carry a weapon when I retired from law enforcement. But as times went on, I said, I really need to protect my family. And I found that it was hard for me as retired law enforcement, to obtain a purchase permit or to obtain, a firearms ID card. So I think that some of the legislation some of the things that's in the law now need to be looked at and changed so that we can catch up to the 21st century here in New Jersey. But as far as the laws that they're trying to enact, I think they missed the mark, because doing gun back programs, a lot of the people that bring their guns in are people from out of state who are turning in guns that they inherited. You're not taking guns off of the street of gang members, as you said.
Right.
And the gangs are becoming violent. So the gun back program really benefits folks that, like when my dad died, he was a gun collector. He had about 18 guns. So we were like, listen, we told my son, take the guns, turn them in, get what you can for it, and enjoy, have a night out. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that I didn't see hard-nosed criminals turning guns in. So we have to put more of an effort in the enforcement. Guns are being brought into our community from other states that have stringent gun laws. And that's a problem for us. It's been a problem not just recently, it's been a problem when I was a narcotics detective. I would be in a room and talk to suspects and say, well, how are you going to get the guns? And they would lay it out. When I worked for the ATF task force, I knew that they were planning on robbing guns from trains, and they would take those guns and they would bring them into our community and they would sell them. I knew that folks that lived in southern Jersey or southern states would come up here and sell the guns that they stole off of shipments. So we have to put more of an emphasis in reducing gun violence in our community by looking at the gang members and how they're getting guns. That is the issue. There's too many guns on our streets.
Mm-hmm. What about requiring officers to live in the communities they serve and work in?
So most police departments now have a requirement, a yearly requirement. Some are 2, some are 3 for officers to live in the community. The problem is that sometimes when officers live in the community, it's a threat to their family members, and also to the officers, a retaliation from folks that they arrested while on the job. So that was one of the main concerns that drove legislation to not require police officers to live in the county or the city that they work in, was basically for the officer's safety and the safety of the innocent family members who were objects of attack by criminals who had an encounter. I'll give you a good example. We had one police officer. He lived in I think it was a town in the inner city. He was on vacation with his family. He was down there. He saw someone that he arrested. The individual, when he came back here, he knew where the officer lived at, and they attacked the family. They destroyed his home. And from that was the argument that officers not be required to live in the cities that they work in. Now, there is a requirement because I do feel that officers need to know the communities that they work in. So I'm kind of, I understand that the community is saying we want officers to live in our communities. And yes, I do believe, I understand that. But at the same time, we also have to think about the officer's citizens' safety, because they're also a citizen of the United States and they have certain rights as well. And they need to protect their family and themselves so they can come into our community and do the job. And sometimes that requires them to be out of the community and to come into the community for the safety of their family. So that's my personal feeling based upon personal experience, because working, as you know, as an undercover detective, I didn't want to live in a community that I did undercover operations in, because it was, of course, it was a safety hazard, not only to myself, but to other residents of the community. because we were doing narcotics investigations and operations at a time where folks didn't care about who they killed. They would just come in and spray up the house, and you got innocent neighbors who are being killed. And I wouldn't want, as a homeowner, a police officer in my neighborhood with that type of potential. It's good to see the police car in front of the house. That's great. But if it's going to bring harm to my family, no, get out of my community.
Right. In our lifetime, have you ever seen the trust divide between the community and law enforcement this wide? Is it a function of the media generating this sort of atmosphere of distrust and rage and anger, or is it even more real and even worse than we can perceive in the media?
When I first retired, I remember walking in the city of Irvington. I was just coming out of a church service, and I was walking in a radio car rolled by two young men who were in front of me. And the way they were talking about the police, I said, wow, how did we get here? Did they, it honestly made me feel like they used to say that about me when I rode through the neighborhood. But there used to be a time when police officers rolled through the neighborhood and they would say hello, and they would get out the car and they would help you, and the community welcomed the police officers. Now there's such a great divide, and a lot of it has to do with the way that we're policing. Officers don't get out of the cars. They keep the windows up, and the only time they get out of the cars and interact with people in the community is when they're locking someone up, or responding to some type of crime that has happened in the community. And even when that happens, there's an attitude. There's an attitude that law enforcement carries that we're very callous sometimes because of the work that we do. But we have to be more sensitive as to the different cultures that we service, and that you just can't be a cookie cutter law enforcement agency when you live in a city or work in a city that has a diversity of very diverse cultures. So I think that we have been failing. The leadership has been failing not only the community, but the officers themselves by not giving them the training, the diversity training, to make sure that they get out in the community. But to answer your question, I've never seen the divide that exists between community and law enforcement as bad as it is now. And I intend on bridging that gap. And the way you bridge that gap is by getting out in the community. Me, the sheriff, coming out into the community, not sending folks out there, me getting out there. And the sheriff, especially because he is elected by the people. So, he has to be visible. The sheriff should be visible. And that's what I intend to do as sheriff, is to get back to that. I enjoy walking the streets and talking to folks, not because of tragedy, but building relationship and letting them know that I really care about them, and my office and my officers care about the work that they do and the service that they provide to the community.
You're running off the line, and in Essex County, clearly that's a heavy lift in a Democratic primary with the governor running on top of your opponent. How do you intend to, just the machinations of the campaign, how do you intend to win?
Well, what we're dealing with now is more educated voters. And I believe, we have a phrase in the Essex County community, line A all the way. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we're doing is educating our voters about bullet voting, meaning that it's a Democratic primary. We're all Democrats on the ballots. All of us are Democrats. So you don't have to vote line A all the way. The reason we voted line A all the way was because all of the people that were going to bring change to our community were on line A. But now others who don't care about our community are seated on line A, have been seated on line A. And we have had leaders in our community telling our folks, you have to vote line A all the way. Right. But now folks are saying, well, wait a minute, I'm voting line A all the way, and I don't see any change in my community. The person that we should vote for is not on line A. Why is that? Why? Because they don't want the person that's going to bring change to the community to be on line A. So they put them on line B or line C. So we're educating our voters and our community leaders to listen. They make a wise choice when you vote, and tell the folks that are voting to make a wise decision. Do your homework. And that's what we're seeing as I talk to community groups, They're saying, listen, we want change. I say, well, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not supported by the machine. I'm not supported by line A. I'm going to be either line B or line C. So when you go look at line A, vote for the people who have done some great things in your community, like the senators who have been working hard in the community. And then look down here for the sheriff and look, compare the dirty glass to the clean glass. Which one would you drink from? And then make your decision. And that mentality is picking up in our community. The biggest mistake I think that the machine makes is that they think that they're going to be able to continue that line of thinking and getting those voters to vote that way all the time. They say, oh, it's a big hill to climb. You're talking to a Marine. We have boots to climb hills. Oh, it's a machine. Machines break down. I drive a BMW 535. If one thing goes wrong, the car is down. So it can break. And I believe that the Arnold campaign and Team Arnold, we're the vehicle that's going to change how politics go on in this county through this election, in this primary on June 8th.
Could you tell me a little bit about a significant decision that you made or experience that you had where you showed leadership that the voters of Essex County should know about when they consider you for this critical role in their community?
There's a couple that really are milestones in my career. One was the murder of a police officer in the county of Essex here in the city of Orange by the name of Joyce Carnegie. I was a new captain, just promoted to captain, and I was placed in the homicide squad. And about a month after getting there, I've discovered that she was killed. I got a call from my lieutenant that said that, the police officer that was shot in Orange. And when we got there, it was a great fiasco because we had so many agencies going on helping us out in the investigation. And what we did was it became a real circus because politics had gotten involved. They had locked up the wrong individual. They had beaten him up. They had also arrested other individuals because they were doing their investigation based upon their emotions, and it really was making us look bad. And one of the things that I did was I went to the prosecutor at the time and to my chief. I said, listen, if you would give me complete authority over the investigation with my team, we can solve this. We have information. We know what went down. We know where the suspect is. We know how he murdered her. And we just need to get everything else out of the way. We need you to take the politics out of this investigation. And we went with an investigation of integrity. And what we did was within 2 days, we were able to bring the right suspect to justice and get a full confession. He wasn't beaten. There was no coercing him. He was able to talk freely. He confessed. And at the end of the statement, we asked him again, were you beaten? Were you coerced? Did you get this on your own free will? And he went on to say other niceties about the homicide squad and specifically me. But the privilege that I had was to tell the officer's family that we got the right guy, because what it must have been painful to them to see that every day that they woke up, there was something in the news and it was politically motivated. They wanted to attack the prosecutor and they were using this officer's death, an African-American female officer. And I said, that's not going to happen. And we came together, we did the investigation, good old fashioned police work, and we brought the individual to justice, and he's still in jail now for killing the cop. The second one was an 8-year-old girl who was kidnapped and raped. And, most of the time you get an individual like that, he's not going to survive. And the thing is that I told the officers, listen, don't put a hand on him, because what's more important than your emotions is to understand that we have a job to do for this young lady and her family. And we brought him again to justice, and it was no coercion, no beating. We didn't kill him. That's why I'm saying that what I've done and what others like myself have done that came up in that generation, I said, we don't see that in law enforcement now. And I think that if we have leaders such as myself from that era who come in and can be given the opportunity, we can change the way policing is in Essex County on June 8th. We will be setting a path for the rest of the world, the rest of the nation to see that good old-fashioned policing, protecting and serving, is still what's popular and still what works.
Mr. John C. Arnold, candidate for Essex County Sheriff, I thank you so much for your time today, sir, and for a substantive conversation. And I hope we can continue to have a discussion in the weeks ahead for the June 8th primary.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you and to the viewers.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.